you've been given that property in full payment, so you, the real creditor, have been paid, but the circulation needs to be retired as I pay for it because paid principal is the property of no one. So the first crime of the banking system intervening upon us to merely publish evidence of our promissory obligations is that they launder the principal into their possession. That $1,000 it belongs to them by their obfuscation of the currency. So in the end, then they are laundering all the principal that is ever created into their unrightful possession. This is just their first crime against us. The second crime against us results in terminal failure. Although they've only absorbed a $2 cost, and that's all that's at risk, and that $2 is recouped in just a tiny fraction of the first payment against this debt, they claim interest against the entire principal, which is the property of no one, and which they never gave up any lawful consideration upon which to claim a risk exists. All they've done is issued my promissory obligation to you on what we call their paper, and in fact it's not even their paper in our country. The Treasury prints the notes, the Federal Reserve absorbs the cost of printing and then loans them into circulation. And this is the concept we all need to understand so well. We are not borrowing money from banks.
That's right. And if you're an accountant or a bookkeeper out there, set up a schedule of accounts on a little sheet of paper in a spreadsheet. And if you understand the way that Mike's just described, the way the banks issue the loans, which is the way that it is, you'll notice right away that if you were in college and you were asked to set up a schedule the way that the bank does it and try to make it work, you'll notice immediately that it doesn't work, because as soon as you hand the promissory note to the bank, they take it as theirs, as Mike's saying. They think it's theirs, but it's not. It's yours. And right there, right at the very beginning, the system is broken, but nobody notices this. I mean, this is the way the system works. It's completely corrupt. But as you're saying, it's the first thing that they do, that their first offense against us is to take our promise to pay, and they take it as theirs, but it's not.
Yes, all payments of principal are actually to be retired from circulation, as I said, because you, the creditor, have been paid in full. So therefore, as I pay the principal off, in following of this life cycle of a promissory obligation, then paid principal belongs to no one, and rightly so, because that and that alone maintains a circulation which at all times is equal to the remaining value of the related property, which alone maintains the integrity of the promissory obligation. If we were to corrupt or subvert the proportions, maintaining that $1,000 of principal in circulation, for instance, we corrupt the value of the currency by what we call inflation, which is traditionally defined as an increase in circulation per goods and services, or represented wealth, as I prefer to say. So price inflation is actually a consequence of this second crime against us, which is to impose interest as if the principal were at risk to the bank, when it isn't even the property of the bank and it's only properly retired from circulation. So the second crime is actually my 1968 thesis of inevitable failure. The second crime is that they, by imposing interest upon us, which is completely unjustifiable because the property isn't theirs, the principal that is, it's only rightly retired from circulation, it's not at risk, the $100,000 is not at risk property of the bank, it was created, it's not borrowed. You can't borrow something that doesn't exist. If I don't have a 12-inch crescent wrench, you cannot borrow a 12-inch crescent wrench from me. If I create a 12-inch crescent wrench, then and then alone could you borrow it from me, but you certainly can't borrow it from me if it doesn't exist.
That's
if
correct.
I'm creating it out of my 12-inch crescent wrench, if I, the banks, am creating it out of Mike Montagne's 12-inch crescent wrench, they can't claim it's a debt to them.
And that's one of the powers of their corrupt system, because it's a corrupt system and it's a scheme. When I find sometimes when I'm trying to explain this to people, they have trouble understanding that what I'm getting them to understand is that this doesn't work. It's they're thinking from the perspective of, the bank gave me the money, and they sometimes have trouble wrapping their head around that they need to maybe I'm having trouble articulating it, but they need to understand that people generally have a hard time understanding something that looks right to be wrong. And you got to convince them, they have to convince themselves in their own heads that, oh my goodness, this is actually a scheme, it's a scam. And, but they're not looking for a scam. Do you know what I mean? They have to be first taught that they have to first be brought to an understanding that it's a scam. Once they understand that, then they can understand what we're talking about right now. But sometimes that's a bit of a stumbling block for them.
Well, of course, they need to unravel all of this, which is why I go through this obfuscation of the promissory obligation, because unless they understand that those are the actual terms of what's going on, they can never understand this. And so, yes, it's as if, Mike Montagne, created this promissory obligation to you, and I just jumped at a third person just jump in there and say, no, you guys can't do this, and do this sleight of hand thing, which launders, which gives you a piece of paper that says $100,000 on it, and it tells Mike Montagne that, okay, Mike, now you owe me the $100,000. I just write out a piece of paper that says $100,000, but Mike Montagne owes me a house now. Okay, just in principle. And on top of that, Mike Montagne, because I'm going to charge him interest, Mike Montagne owes me 3 houses. So for just intervening upon this transaction, this agreement between you and I, this third person, the banking system, collects 4 houses, though it produces nothing. You see?
That's right. It's equivalent to having a bad foundation in a house, which causes the building to shift and the roof to leak. And having people rush to the roof with more shingles and nails saying, my goodness, the roof is leaking, we better fix this. Well, that's not the problem. The problem is you got a bad foundation and you got a structural problem. And now your roof is leaking, and maybe the windows start leaking or the doors start creaking and they don't shut properly anymore. And so what do? Well, let's fix it. Instead of fixing the underlying problem, you see the politicians and the enacting new laws. For example, in Canada, we looked at the housing fiasco, the mortgage crisis in the States, and the politicians said, well, my goodness, we can't have that here. Joe homeowner, the greedy litter SOB that he is, he'd better not buy a house to put a roof over his head. So we're going to now raise it so that if he can't come up with 10% of his of the down payment, we're not going to let him buy a house. And we're going to go one step further. If somebody loans you the money, or if somebody dies and gives you the money for the down payment for a house, that's still not good enough. You have to prove that you've earned it. It's despicable. So not only are they giving us they're taking away their unearned benefit of or benefiting from this unearned profit that they're getting off our backs. They're compounding it by making it even more difficult.
Yes, and they're treating the symptoms there only. And as you've just said, the foundation of the system is the very problem. And the people can understand that only from a continuation of this obfuscation of the currency, because what is the ramification of this unjustifiable imposition of interest? It is not property that the banking system gives up. It's a piece of paper.
That's right.
We're not borrowing it. We're allowing them, as if they're the only possible publisher of our promissory obligations to each other, to impose upon us the obfuscation that we have to borrow our own promissory obligations to each other from them.
And
that's what's wrong with it. But the thing is what the ramification of this interest is, and this is what everyone needs to understand. by applying laws and regulations which impose ever more difficult conditions on us, the purported borrower, who are merely people who have been denied our right to issue our own promissory obligations to each other. They're actually trying to prevent the culmination of this obfuscation of the currency, which is terminal and which will transpire anyway. All they're going to do is put more people out of homes, or limit the quality of the homes which we could easily otherwise afford. And as I've shown, the liquidity that we realize by transforming this system into mathematically perfected economy would reap a approximately 12-fold increase in liquidity just for transferring our present conditions into what conditions we would exist under mathematically perfected economy instead, where we refinance our homes under mathematically perfected economy, counting all prior payments of interest instead toward principal, unjustified interest, I might emphasize.
That's right. And what the people need to understand as well, and they need to understand this immediately, is when the government starts to intervene with their so-called solutions and their Band-Aid solutions. They're putting Band-Aids on a cadaver that's got cancer.
They're just perpetuating the crime against us by preserving the banking system.
The
banking system has to be eradicated, or the people's objects can never be served. And the reason is this obfuscation of the currency.
And they're compounding the problem, and it's accelerating, because when they start to put these so-called fixes in place, it actually starts to accelerate the problem. Because if you deny somebody the opportunity to get a mortgage to build a house, then you're further depressing the economy by that act, which will accelerate the collapse.
Yes, in truth it does. Same with this pretended principle of austerity. But people can't understand that unless we finish this obfuscation of the currency thing, which I want to wrap up quickly. The thing is why interest or usury is outlawed in Scripture, is not explained in Scripture. But yet, if we unravel it step by step, we can understand what's happening here in this case that we're just explaining, where suddenly my obligation to pay $100,000 out of circulation to retire it as I pay it out of circulation is obfuscated into a falsified artificial debt to the banking system, which merely published evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, and yet upon which, as if that was property, earned wealth or of the bank, its interest is imposed upon it. And this interest is a thing of consideration. This lie of interest, as if interest is distinct from usury. I did a paper, over 35 years ago. Interest is usury, which is a mathematic proof that any rate of interest inevitably terminates a system which is subject to interest under insoluble sums of artificial debts, which is this artificial debt that we've just described. There is no actual debt to the bank, because the bank never gave up the banking system, central banking system, never gave up lawful consideration, which equates to the debt which is purported to exist. Instead, they merely published evidence of our promissory obligations. But what happens when, furthermore, they subject this obfuscation to interest? This comprises an implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation. What do I mean by this? This is merely an exacting description of exactly what the case is. We have to maintain a vital circulation. That $100,000 has to be in circulation so long as I'm to pay the $100,000 out of the circulation. That's just the principle. But I'm obligated to pay the principal and the interest out of circulation. So there's an implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation, and the only way to do that is by reborrowing the principal that I pay out of the circulation and the interest that I pay out of the circulation, which increases the indebtedness by so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt. So this process, this obfuscation, escalates the rate of failure itself. And let's explain how this does this. In the beginning, we loan this $100,000 into circulation, which is not actually a loan. We're not really borrowing money from a bank. They're merely publishing evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. But we say we're borrowing it from the bank, and then we have to pay it to the bank, and it goes